Welcome back to Your Average Witch. In this episode, I'm talking to Amy Blackthorn, author of books like Blackthorn's Botanical Magic, Blackthorn's Botanical Brews, and Sacred Smoke. She even has a book on protection magic coming out next. Amy tells us about her determination to learn about plants, shares her story about miraculous healing, and has a lightning strike to the face. Is the lightning metaphorical or real life? Listen and find out. Now let's get to the stories. Hi Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I would love it if you would introduce yourself to everybody and let them know who you are and what you do and where they can find you.
Fantastic. So my name is Amy Blackthorn. I have been teaching internationally. And my goodness, I started teaching in 1999 all over the place. I get to talk about the magic of plants. Talk about how we can develop an allyship with them and really create a whole spirit practice based on our relationships and our allyships with these plants around us. I have a tea shop, Blackthorn's Botanicals. You can find that at blackthornsbotanicals.com. Right now, I'm actually working on edits for my fourth book. And then the minute those are done, I get to start on book 5. So I've been published since 2018 when Blackthorn's Botanical Magic came out, which I hear is sold quite a few copies. I'm excited. Sacred Smoke came out the October after that in 2019, and it's building a complete practice from the ground up without appropriating from indigenous cultures, use of cleansing with smoke. And then in the middle of the pandemic, I brought out a really neat book called Blackbird Botanical Brews. It's a potions book. So it's full of neat, practical, fun projects you can do at home by yourself and really gives you something to do and enjoy and a way to preserve the nature's bounty with a little bit of help from chemistry. So things like making soda syrups. That's been keeping me sane. Yeah. And it's really a lot of fun. So it's set up a lot like Blackbird's Botanical Magic in that it gives you the neat ingredients, what they can do for you magically, how you can work with them, and then things to do with them. So pouring out apple cider for blessing your garden as you're getting ready to till it under for the year or open it up for the spring.
Oh, because I'm getting ready to do that for our fall garden.
What are you planting in the fall?
I don't know. Cucumbers?
Ooh, all the cold things. All the cold things.
Well, it's going to be it's still going to be hot. It's still going to be hot here. Because this is when our growing season starts.
Oh, yum.
So, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no idea. But, anyway, do you want to drop your socials or anything, or do you want to do that at the end?
I sure will. You can find me on Amy Blackthorn Author on Facebook. There's also Amy Blackthorn Author on Instagram. On TikTok, there's Blackthorn's Botanicals. I give little tidbits of different essential oils and magical uses for our plant allies in between 1 and 3 minutes. And I'm really excited at playing around with getting to know people through these avenues.
I'm a big Instagram person myself. Do you have Twitter?
I do. At Morrigan's Witch on Twitter.
Oh.
It's, oh my goodness, I've been on Twitter for 1 trillion years, I think.
What made you want to write these books, and what made you want to work with plants?
It's funny. I was writing, I found diaries from kindergarten where I was writing stories and telling my point of view on things almost before I could write. I mean, they're in the middle of this purple floral diary. There's a really bad drawing of Garfield the cat eating lasagna. Like, it's old school. These diaries that I found. And so I've always been writing. My editor actually came to me, goodness, in 2015. We were hanging out at a really incredible shop that used to be in the Bronx. We were going to an event. It was a class on the Witches of Yule. So my editor was like, look, I love your voice. You've got presence and you've got all these really great people. Have you thought about writing a book? And I said, well, I'm writing 5 books right now. I don't I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just writing so I don't lose my mind. I've got to get it out. And she asked for the elevator pitch for the 5 books that I had on my plate. And she says, okay, this one, I like this idea. You send me that. I don't know what that means. My dear friend Natalie, who is also an author, said, okay, well, you need a proposal and you have to write this and you have to do that. And I didn't know any of it. And the fact that someone was going to give me something I'd wanted since before I could write my own name, I was terrified. I don't know how to handle this. This sounds like everything I've ever wanted. What if I screw it up?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I took a year and I wrote this proposal. It turned out to be about 40 pages. And I sent it to Judica, author of Element Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells, and Mystic Saints and Sages, and Encyclopedia of Spirits, and all these really incredible books that I had been reading for so long. How am I gonna, okay, I guess I'll just do this. It's just my whole life here. And I hit send and I thought I was gonna die. But it was the best thing I've ever done. I mean, I've worked with plants my just about my entire life. We grew up, my sisters and I we had this house / apartment in Baltimore City for the first few years that we were people. And so I grew up in the city. The elementary school that I went to was, had blacktop instead of a yard for the kids to play in. The fences were 30 feet high just to keep people from coming into the schoolyard. And, the occasional tree on a corner somewhere was very small and very manicured. Very sick. Yes, you are not wrong. So this little postage stamp of a backyard that we had was all the exposure to nature that I really had. Just some hard scrabble grass and this very small mint plant that the previous tenants had planted over by the basement door. I thought that was the neatest thing because somebody told me you could eat this.
Yeah.
And you're like, so people eat stuff that grows out of the ground? You're a kid. I know about 7-Eleven and going to the grocery store, but I don't know about farming. And it wasn't until I was in the 2nd grade that we actually moved out into the county. And all of a sudden we had an acre of grass and 2 trees of our very own. And it was the neatest thing. I'm wandering around and exploring this new space. And there's this plant right in between the basement windows. And I'm watching this grow and turn green and these flowers appear. And I'm so entranced with the idea of flowers. Like, I just sat in front of this plant watching it every day for, about an hour a day, trying to see what's new, what's happening. Until one day I'm sort of petting this bush and the flower fell out. And I thought, oh my God, I broke it. And I looked down and this little cup is a black seed. And it's like, it blew my mind. Seeds come from flowers? Like, what? This is magic. This is what magic is right here. It turns out it's an azalea. Everyone on the planet knows what an azalea is, but I'm in the 2nd grade. I don't know any of these things yet.
I don't even know if I know what they look. I don't know if I could identify them.
It was incredible. So the idea of plants being linked to magic has been there since the 2nd grade. It's really just been a part of that. Fast forward to me going to school for horticulture and laying on the ground in my garden with a feather I found, trying to cross-pollinate my red petunias with my purple petunias to see if I can get like a stripe or something.
Plant nerds.
Plant nerds. No lie. Yeah, I mean, I was, I think it was probably the next year, I was doing chores for the neighbors for pocket change so I could buy my own window box and my own soil and my own petunias. Like, I'm carrying a bag of soil on my bike from the grocery store, pedaling as fast as my little legs can carry me because I have dirt now. I have my very own dirt. And it's just been there the whole time. I mean, I didn't find my first book on witchcraft until I was all of 11. I had an older sister who is 3 years older than me. Her and I shared a bedroom, and our 2 younger sisters shared a bedroom. And anybody who has a younger sibling knows the fastest way to get them involved in your business is to tell them they're not wanted. Well, now you got to be doing something cool here. So getting all that together and making sure that they really invest themselves and know what's happening. I had to figure out what was in that book bag. What does my sister got? What's happening here? And it wasn't until, goodness, everybody went to bed and I'm sort of Pink Panthering out of the bed to sort of creep across the floor on my tippy fingers to make sure I'm opening the zipper one tooth at a time and really, okay, let's figure this out. And I open it and there's Wicca Guide for Solitary Practitioner by Scott Cunningham.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, let's see what this is. I scoot back to my bed and I read it by not even a flashlight. I'm using the light from the gas station down the street to make sure that I don't get caught. Like out of the corner of my eye, I'm reading this book. And it was the best. All these things that I had thought and felt and knew in my heart were important were just right there for the taking, so to speak. So I just spent the next, 3 or 4 years reading everything I could find. You know, going to the...
You were going to say sneaking books out of your sister's book.
Well, it totally could have been a thing. I never told my sister that. I might have to send her this podcast. So we're going through all this. I'm looking, I'm reading, I'm going to the library after school, and life happens. You sort of figure a way around things. It wasn't until I was probably 14 that I actually bought my own copy and started working through the rituals and writing my own teenager book of shadows in a marble composition book that I still have. And
oh, really?
Oh yeah.
Dang.
It's embarrassing.
Still, I wish I had stuff like that.
It's one of the very few things that I have from my life before I bought the home where I currently live. I have probably a handful of things that exist, and that is one of them. I was very happy to make sure that survived all the subsequent moves, and it's a really fantastic feeling.
What does it mean to you to call yourself a witch?
It means that I work in concert with the elements and beings, the plant allies, the nature spirits, gods, goddesses, all of those beings together to really live my life in tune with not just my surroundings, but it's so easy in an age of social media and our phones are welded to our hands. It's so easy to forget that outside even exists.
Yeah.
My very first high priestess was allergic to the outside. She was an ER nurse and had no interest in being outside. So it's easy to get divorced from that realm of nature, that connection with the seasons and not just the wheel of the year, so to speak, but even the individual attentions and the ebb and flow of the moon.
Do you have any daily rituals that you'll share with us?
I do. My very first one is always making some tea in the morning, and it sounds very mundane, with good reason, because I definitely want to remind my readers and my listeners there's no mundania, there's no mundane world. We only get one. We get one world. It can feel sort of disconnected, but the more things we incorporate in our daily life, the better we're able to remind ourselves that everything you do is magic. So in the morning, I get up and I have a basket of ingredient teas as opposed to fully blended material teas. And I really think about what it is that I want to accomplish that day.
Ooh.
And if it's editing my book, I might use something for clear thinking or clear speech. I might use a black tea base, so I have a little caffeine to aid my concentration. If I've got a day of running errands and doctor's appointments, I might have something for stress relief. So it's really important that I stop and I blend with intention. I make sure that each of those components has a really strong connection with what I'm doing that day. And I will bless it as I'm going through the motions and thinking about the tea heating up, the water, adding that energy to the water. And real tea, the loose leaf, full flavored junk it takes actual time to brew. So instead of the unorthodox teas where you can just put a bag in some water and 3 seconds later it's got tea flavor, it takes about 5 minutes. So that crush, tear, cut method gives a lot of open edges, so it brews really quickly, which is why it's often bitter. So I can really take that time to set my intention and really think about the things that I want to bring into my daily practice that day. So if it's a meditative space I need because I had a nightmare, well, then that's going to be a completely different brew than if I've got to run and have a meeting with 6 other people that day.
Do you have any family history with witchcraft?
Yes and no. We all go through that time when we're 14, 15 years old, or like, my grandma's a witch and I'm cool because of it. I was obsessed with my grandmother's crystal ball that my mom had as a kid, to the point where in the 5th grade we had like a Renaissance fair day. It was a field day, and actually snuck into the living room to steal the crystal ball to go with my little fortune teller outfit that I made myself. I got in so much trouble. But I was obsessed with that crystal ball that belonged to my grandmother.
I would have been too. That's cool.
It's incredibly awesome. And so my whole childhood, I'm trying to make sure that I whatever excuse I could find to spend time near it, I was there. So it wasn't until, even as a younger teenager, 14, 15 years old, I'm like, okay, this is a real thing. I can probably do something fantastic with this. And my mom was having none of it. It was the only thing she had that belonged to her mother. So I could totally understand. So it got to the point where I annoyed her enough that we were at a yard sale one day, and she saw a pack of tarot cards. She's like, yeah, you should go with those and leave my crystal ball alone. So I have my very first deck of Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck for 50 cents. I still have that deck.
Oh, dang. That's a good deal.
That's a good deal. Somebody had bought it with, to check it out, and just wound up in the yard sale pile with a black light and a poster of what?
Was it one of the blacklight posters that's like velvety?
Yes, it was. She's like, I'll give you the whole lot for
Spencer's special.
So I dove headfirst into my tarot deck at 14 years old and didn't come up for air probably ever, because I still have tarot clients today. It's one of the first things you see on amyblackthorn.com is like, click here if you need a reading. But I'll tell you what, my uncle, bless him, was killed in Afghanistan. And when my mother lost her only brother, who was still with us, she started divesting herself from some things. She's like, I don't want to wait until I'm not here anymore. So she gave me our grandmother's crystal ball. And so it's got a very special place on my altar, and it's in the crystal ball stand that my stepfather carved for her. It's got a very special place in my heart, but I still can't use it because it's too special. It's too precious. I think I'm afraid of it because it's so personally and emotionally a valuable item. I still to this day I collect crystal balls, and I adore the different materials, and I love talking about them. I'll teach crystal magic classes, and I'll show them off on my Zoom classes. But it's too special. I can't. I would die if something happened to it.
And this is where the audio issues occurred. Sorry about the interruption. Let's get back into the stories.
Yeah, as a older young adult, probably 17 or 18, I was dating a wonderful human who he and I are still friends to this day. And his parents wanted me to go to church with them. I had spent the night. We had been dating forever. They wanted me to go to church with them. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But this was an old school church. There was a very interesting sect of Lutherans where the women weren't allowed to wear pants. Like, all the women are wearing like ankle length denim skirts for some reason.
Yeah, the denim.
And the women aren't allowed to cut their hair until they get married, and like it's a thing. So she's like, okay, we want you to go with us, but I had a pentacle thumb ring for a trillion years. I had worn it so long that I couldn't get it off my thumb. Like it's there. It's just a part of my body now. I don't know what to tell you. So I was pretty sure she wanted me to wear gloves at this point, but I went. I was a respectful person. But I'll tell you what, as big a deal as she made about me having a pentacle ring in her church, like I wanted to be a little bit of a troll. I was a good kid and I didn't, but the thought was definitely there.
Did you just spin it around so it wasn't facing out or anything?
Yes, I did. I said, that's what I would have done. This is the compromise that I can totally make. I will absolutely spin it around. It's not like any of these people knew who I was or even spoke to me. It was such a close-knit church that 2/3 of the members of this church all have the same last name. Like, okay.
I know I have the questions as best, first, funniest, or worst, I mean. But I want to hear your funniest witchcraft experience. Or most triumphant.
Most triumphant is amazing. So
yeah.
my first coven, I mentioned my nature averse high priestess. So by the time I left that coven, it had grown to the point where we had 35 members. Our witch queen actually got to the point where she's like, nobody can handle this. You got to split it into 2 covens. So we did that, but right before the acknowledgement of how unwieldy this group was, we had a member who joined probably a year after I did. So she had been there for a number of years. She had not been feeling well. She went to a doctor and she got the results that she had stomach cancer, and it was pretty advanced. And that like they were talking about, you have a month to live. Serious. And so because of the number of nurses in our coven, we had always sort of seen ourselves as specializing in healing work. So we crowded everyone as best we could into our ritual room, and we split everybody up. There's this group over here is chanting, this group over here is dancing, this group over here is doing Reiki directly on our person. We were really broke it up so that there was a lot of energy being raised. So, this room was 9 by 10 or something, and we've got 30 people crammed in here doing ritual. And our high priestess is, she's directing all this energy and sort of orchestrating the whole shebang. And so we had been working, it felt like an hour. And we brought the energy to a crescendo, and she directed it. We let it go, and we crossed our fingers. And it was probably another month before we saw that coven member again for our next coven meeting. And she said, I went back to the doctor for another scan, and there is no trace of any cancer in my body.
What?
And so she went from being told she had a month to live to this was 21 years ago, and she's still going strong. She's still kicking butt, taking names. Not a single trace. Has never been another cancer scare since.
The hell?
Right. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of ways to explain that away, but this was so impactful. It was, you walked out of that ritual room and your hair is standing up because of the amount of energy that was raised in that space for that time, and it was incredible. And for her to still be kicking was incredible. That's incredible.
Awesome.
It really is. And I really have no words when I talk about it. I could have explained it away, but I had something similar happen. Not necessarily a cancer scare, but I was in a real bad car accident 18 years ago. I was still in that coven at that point, and it was traumatic. I died on the scene. They declared me dead. I was no longer here. The professionals were able to do what they do, and they actually flew me to the nearest hospital. They were able to revive me in the helicopter. I got transferred and they took care of me in 10 hours of surgery to put me back together.
Lord.
Oh, yeah. I woke up with 72 pins, and they didn't think I'd make it through the night. Well, my people got in contact with my high priestess, and they were able to come up the next morning. So by the time I was awake for a few minutes on Friday, it happened overnight Thursday into Friday. So by Saturday morning, I was sort of awake-ish, but they said, look, we don't know if you're going to make it. We don't know if you're definitely probably never going to walk again. We're going to do what we can. So my high priestess reached out to the rest of the tradition, who, the people who didn't know me in person had, sort of hung out at our group camping event every summer. So at least they had an idea of who I was. So my doctors were keeping in close touch with me. And it wasn't a few hours later, the nurses came in, the CNAs came in. They needed to change my bedding. And they're trying to figure out how to do this if both my arms are broken, both my legs are broken.
Oh.
My pelvis is cracked in half. My collarbone is broken. My face is broken. Like, how do they... It's not like you can roll me on one side.
Be unpleasant.
Yes. I was able to stand up out of my bed.
What?
Yeah. I stood on one foot.
That's not how science works, ma'am. Bodies don't work like that.
I stood up on the least broken leg, and they put my other leg on those little round stools that the doctors scoot around on. And the nurses sort of held their hands out around my body to make sure they didn't fall down.
I can envision it.
As you get the world's fastest bedding change in history. But my doctor came in later that evening, probably the next morning, and was like, look, I cannot explain this. You are healing at a faster rate than anyone has a right to, and I don't understand it. I had gotten my black belt 2 months before the accident, and he's like, I guess it's just how physically fit you are that you're healing so well. I'm like, no. He's like, if you know what the answer is, like, tell me so I can help other people with it. I was like, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I can't help you. He's like, okay, what's the secret if you can't help me? Like, I said, there's 500 witches praying for me right now. Like, this isn't something you can replicate every other day. And he says, okay, that you're right. That's not something I can replicate.
Did his face do anything?
Oh, yeah. It looked like it just melted right off his face. His face melted off. It was just aghast at it. Okay, that's not something I can fix. I can't explain that away. It's magic. The hospital was really incredible. It happened beginning of October. So I was still in the hospital. I was in that hospital for 6 months. I was in a rehab hospital for a number of months. But that meant that I was in this hospital for the level of care that I needed at Samhain. And so my coven made the trek. I mean, from Baltimore to Delaware, it's about an hour. So they all drove an hour to come invade my hospital room so I could be a part of our Samhain ritual. I had a room to myself at that point because I had broken so many bones that the nurses just walking into the room, just doing their little nursey shuffle, I'd
vibrated you.
Yeah, it shook me enough that I just scream in pain. So they're like, you need your own room. We'll put you over here. Which made for a great privacy fence when it came time to have a Samhain ritual of our very own. They're like, we're going to give you your meds so you can we don't need to interrupt you. You need an hour. We'll give you an hour. Like, we'll make sure that nobody bothers you. Like, they stationed somebody outside to make sure nobody came in to bother us. It was the most respectful thing I think I've ever experienced as a witch. People just said, oh yeah, you need yeah, we got you. There was no, oh, but you're witches. There was none of that. It was just like, you need a thing? We got you. Incredible.
Yeah.
Never would have expected it.
No. Having worked in healthcare. No.
Yeah, it was really great. They in the records they asked what my religious preference was. It says in the computer, it says Wiccan right there. It says, They sent a priest to talk to me at one point. They're supposed to get trained in all the religions, and he wasn't a jerk or anything, but he wasn't necessarily all that helpful. But yeah, it was
good for him for trying.
He gets an A for effort. Yeah, they were fantastic.
What would you say your biggest motivator is in witchcraft?
Trying to be a better person tomorrow than I am today. Absolutely, 1,000%. When I have people come to me for all sorts of things. I mean, there used to be a website called allexperts.com where you could go and submit a question, and then an expert would get back to you, the answer to your question. So I volunteered with them for 12 years until they were bought by about.com and shut down. So yeah, it's great. The things that people have asked and the things that people have come to me with, I mean, they just sort of blurt out their life story, and you're left with, okay, how do I fix this for a complete stranger? And every time I talked to a new person, every time I got a new question, it was always like, how can I help this person understand that A, they're not alone, B, the things that are scary and that they're dealing with, they're not the only one. How can I do that for these people? And so the answer is always to really try and my level best to be a better person tomorrow than I was today. That means we're always learning, especially when I have new students who have never taken a class with me before. They're like, but I'm new. Dude, we are all new at some point. I just started a little bit before you. There is no difference. We were the same. It was really important because especially when you're dealing with things like trauma and people are scared and they're worried and they're anxious and they're thinking that they're the only person who has ever been through this. They have been not just disenfranchised, but really having to take that time to say, okay, is this who I am? Is this something that's been done to me? To help people understand that it's okay to take your power back. It's okay to make that mean something. That's my biggest motivator, is to help, not just because it's a nice thing to do, but to make sure that people understand that even if something really awful happens, there's understanding and there's something we can gain from it. I will not ever tell someone, oh, everything happens for a reason, because that's trite crap.
Thank God.
But I will say that we are more than the sum of things that have happened to us. And that is something that's really important to hear, especially when you're at a point where you're feeling vulnerable. My very first spell that I did with my coven, all of 18. The minute I turned 18, I ran out and I joined the first coven I could find. Never do that. Like, date around a bit. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. But the very first spell that I did with that coven was I went to my high priestess and I told her I had been the victim of an assault, and I needed to do some magic about it. And she was right there with me. She told me what we were going to do. She was able to, she did all the circle casting, she did all the setup. She made sure that I had the space that I needed. She left me alone in the room to get out my feelings on the subject, to deal with it as best I felt I could. And then she'd help me with the after part. She'd tell me what to do with it. And it was the single most empowering thing that I've probably ever done, because I was able to not make peace, because there was no peace with that particular instance, but to put it in a frame that I could deal with, put it in a place and that I felt that I had done something about it. That was the single most impactful magic that I've ever worked. And it was something that will stay with me forever. That's what I want to make sure that other people have. People tell them that if something bad happens to you, that it must be something you've done. Like, what did you do to make so-and-so do X? And it's like, that is the most toxic crap I have ever heard. Don't tell people that. Toxic positivity is so prevalent, and it's really
Lord.
It's gross. It's actually one of the first things that I talk about in the new book that's coming out is Blackbird's protection magic. So it's an entire book of this is how we handle our stuff. And one of the first things I talk about is how toxic positivity is just destroying people. Don't do that. I mean, our society tells us that if something bad happens to you, it's your fault. You know, bad things only happen to bad people. That's crap. Bad things happen to good people every day. I worked in executive protection for 15 years. I can tell you some stories about awful things that happen to good people. Crappy things happen to good people every day. Don't play into that by asking people, well, what did you do to make X happen? What were you wearing, or where were you going, or why were you at that party?
The sound you heard was my eyes rolling really hard.
Bless you. It's super important that people know that it's never your fault. It's not the victim's fault. Doesn't matter how you got to your job, what your job was, where you were. None of that stuff matters.
How short your damn skirt was.
Thank you.
If you were wearing a tank top or maybe a little drunk.
Right. None of that is your fault. It is the fault of the person who perpetrated that crime upon your person. It's hard because people want to know. They ask really insensitive questions, and they think, because they want to make sure that the bad thing doesn't happen to them. And it's like, that's not how this works. I was, even being in executive protection, even being in private security, I've had crappy things happen at work, from work. People who know that I'm a professional and that this is my daily job and it would go badly for you, still wanted to ride the ride.
That is a good way to put it.
I talk about this in Blackbird's Protection Magic. There's a chapter, there's a section on personal security, like things to do with your actual person, not just magically, but physically. Stuff to carry with you, places to go, how to escape duct tape and handcuffs and zip rope and zip ties and chains, like how to take care of yourself. It's so awesome.
I'm excited for this.
It's my favorite part of the book. But there's a section where I talk about my protection journey, and there's a story of this. As I'm in security for the building where I was working, and I attracted a stalker. Someone who knew I was a competitive shooter, who knew I taught women's self-defense classes, that I have a black belt, that I teach concealed carry classes, knew all the things. I had worked there for long enough that he knew all the things, and still thought that this was a smart idea. Actually,
what's wrong with people?
Super special. I actually looked at the detective who came to respond to my boss calling the police to make sure that this was handled. And I said to him, I said, look, they tell women every day, from the time we're born, wear your hair in a ponytail and park in well areas and make sure you check the back seat of your car for an intruder and all this crap.
How to carry your keys.
Right. Oh, the key thing makes my hair curl. Stop telling people to carry their keys in between their fingers. Because if you punch somebody, yes, you'll break your fingers.
No, thank you.
It just don't do it. So every time I see that one, especially that one, and the wasp spray instead of pepper spray also curls my hair.
What? Why would you? I'm not carrying bug spray around.
Thank you. They're like, oh, if you can't find pepper spray,
it's a huge can.
And there's a giant federal warning label on the back that says if you do that, you can be arrested for assault, just for protecting yourself. Don't wind up in jail just to not be dead. Stop doing. This is not a choice. Don't do that. It's not if or and. How about neither? So I asked the police detective. He responded to the phone call. I said, look, I did everything right. I got a black belt. I shoot competitively. I do all the things. I teach other people how to do all of the things. Why is this happening? And he looked at me right in my face. He said, look, he seems too cocky to do the suicide by cop thing. He said, he said, I think it's just that he wants to know who's better.
Oh,
it's
that
like,
makes sense.
It makes sense, but it's so shitty.
Yeah. It's idiotic.
Yeah. So
but I understand it.
There is no right thing. There's just trying your best. It is never your fault. All any of us can do is try our best.
Jeez.
It's totally a thing. I actually, in going into the whole story, there's content warning and like, make sure that you're in a good place before you read this story because it gets sticky.
Do you feel like you I said this a few hours ago because I'm doing 2 interviews. The term "suffer from" bothers me in this sentence. Do you suffer from imposter syndrome? And if you do, how do you handle it?
It's a good question. If we're not sure about the wording, I will tell you a secret, you and all your listeners. So, Blackthorn's Botanical Magic is 85,000 words. It's a lot. It is still my biggest project to date. When I wrote the proposal, I said, "Oh, maybe I'll take a year to write this." And my publisher said, "How about 8 months? Because it is an encyclopedia. It's pretty hefty. We'll give you 8 months." And I'm like, "Oh my god, how am I going to do this at all?" Like, I said I could do it, so now I guess I have to. I will tell you that they gave me 8 months, and I wrote it in 4 because I spent the first 4 months paralyzed with dread and imposter syndrome. Like, who the heck am I to write a book about this thing that I've been studying since forever? That is the basis of a lot of my practice. Like, how dare I talk about this with
what do I know about all my information that I know?
I have a degree hanging on the wall, and it was super bad. And the long and short of how to deal with it was always, I had to do it. I had to make sure that I was able to prove myself. Like, oh, I tricked them. It's great. I did the thing. No, I was tricking me into sitting down and writing. And it's funny because we're on book number 5 now, and it still happens.
Really?
It happens. Yeah. That
makes me happy about future things in my own life.
It gets easier to deal with, and it happens less time. I was on tour for Blackthorn's Botanical Magic when I got asked if Sacred Smoke would be something I wanted to write, and I said yes. So I came home and I wrote Sacred Smoke in 30 days.
Jesus.
Yep. But I gave myself a shorter deadline. My goodness. And I still spent 2 or 3 days going, can I actually do this? But I'm a double Virgo. So I just organized myself into a coma. I have my outline, which is my favorite. It's a list. And then I break down each chapter into its own list. And it's like, look, everything, it does itself. I didn't have to do it. It did it itself. Now, you and I know that the computer is not going to type itself. But if I tell myself that, look, it's writing itself, I don't have to do it, then I can trick myself into laughing at the imposter syndrome. Like, it's not me, it's just the computer.
It's weird how we do that.
It really is.
I not that exact thing, but I do very similar things to get myself to leave the house sometimes.
Leaving the house.
Like, my shoes are on. I guess I should go get in the car. Oh, look at that bird over there. Oops, I'm in the car. I guess we're going somewhere.
Yes.
What would you say your biggest struggle is when it comes to witchcraft?
I would say my biggest struggle is novelty. I've been doing this. I started reading books when I was 11, and in 6 days I will be 40. And making things new again is definitely my hardest thing. I don't keep a book of shadows. I know it's a big witchy confession. It's my biggest sin is I don't keep a book of shadows.
I don't either.
Because I grew up in a house where I wasn't safe. So the idea of putting down my secrets in a book where someone could come along and read them, just even as an adult, I can't do it. So the making of rituals that are new and creative and also still speak to who I am at that point and what I need and what's happening is a hard thing, because once you've been doing something for a trillion years, you got to have that feeling like, okay, this is something new and different and exciting. I will usually get that with a new book, and it's neat because as an author now, I get people sending books to me who want an endorsement, so I get the sneak preview. But when I get
That's
something
cool.
that really gives me some fire back in my witchcraft, like gives me some novelty and something, a new technique, a new something, that's worth diamonds. Because when you've been doing something a trillion years, it gets to be routine at some point. I'm using the same, if I'm casting a circle, I'm using the same quarter calls and the same invocations I've been using for 20 years. It's the finding a new technique and finding a new something. That's what really drives. So if I can find that, wonderful, fantastic, beautiful. But if it's something that hasn't yet gotten there yet, I'll always be effective in my magic, but it's not necessarily have the same spark as when I have a new toy to play with.
Now I have a question from a patron.
Ooh.
And this is from Madeline, and she asks, what was something you struggled with earlier on in your craft or in general, and how did you overcome it?
One of the characteristics of my struggle with ADHD as a witch is rejection sensitive dysphoria. And especially as an author, to deal with this, because in dealing with rejection sensitive dysphoria, any conversation that's not overly positive, I'm anxious that is, it means that I've failed, that I'm a bad person, that I'm whatever. So in learning and growing as a witch, being able to listen to the feedback, to the needs and desires of people in my community who have concerns or questions or about not just my practice, but the things I teach and how I move through my community, that understanding that it's not about me was super hard. It was being able to take myself out of the equation and see it not just from another person's perspective, because I'm an empathetic person. We move through our communities trying to understand and be cognizant of the point of view of another person. But it was understanding a group's perspective and how my actions could impact more than just myself. Now that I'm an author and now I'm writing things down, how that can impact people more than just myself. When I was writing Blackthorn's Botanical Magic, I had a moment, like a lightning strike to the face at one point, and I realized that this book will outlive me. There will be copies of this book.
Oh, I don't like that.
It's super like, oh my god, why did I think of that? Why is this now a pressure in my head above and beyond the imposter syndrome that was already there? But it was important to really explain to myself and really move forward as a person, understanding that people need more from their magical community. People need to be heard. People need to be seen, understood, acknowledged, any of that. And it's my job to make sure that the words that I say, the words that I write, and the message that I put out into the universe is that our communities are valid. And it's so important to me to make sure that people understand your witchcraft. If it's not inclusive, if it's not feminist, if it's not intersectional, like what are you doing? Period.
I'm smiling, by the way. I'm quiet because I'm smiling really big.
The Black members of our community are screaming that they don't feel heard or seen. The Indigenous members of our community are saying, you're stealing our stuff. Stop it. Like, listening to the people outside of your own experience is more important than any ritual that you can ever do. I'm going to cry. Please.
It's not me this time.
Being able to pull yourself out of the picture and understand that you're not important. The voices of marginalized people in your community are what's important. And so it's not my place to put I don't care about my feelings. Like, this is not about me. This is about members of our community who are not having the same ability to be heard. You can amplify their voices, but it's not about you. That was super hard. And of course it's beautiful and valid and it's, the stuff we're supposed to be doing. But being able to admit myself that I wasn't good at it the first time I tried something, it's not easy.
Nope.
All I can do is try to be a better person tomorrow than I am today.
That's all everybody should be doing.
Yep. All the rituals in the world don't mean matter to a hill of beans if you can't be a decent human being.
My heart. Jeez. Okay, let's take the roller coaster ride because I want to know what makes you angry about the witch community. So we're going to roll down that hill. Then what you love with the witch community, come back up the hill. And then we're going to go to the joy question.
Okay. That sounds like definitely a thing we can do.
Okay. Sorry to cut you off, but Amy and I talked for a very long time. Head over to part 2 of the interview to hear about her loves and hates about the witch community, an experience from Bible camp, and death threats. Yes, real ones. Next on Your Average Witch. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Your Average Witch. You can find us all around the internet on Instagram at Your Average Witch Podcast, Twitter at Average Witch Pod, Facebook at facebook.com/Your Average Witch Podcast, at YourAverageWitchPodcast.com, and at your favorite podcast service. Want to help the podcast grow? Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You just might hear your review read at the end of the next episode. If you'd like to recommend someone for the podcast, like to be on it yourself, or if you'd like to advertise on the podcast, send an email to YourAverageWitchPodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the moon changes. If you'd like to recommend someone for the podcast, like to be on it yourself, or if you'd like to advertise on the podcast, send an email to YourAverageWitchPodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the moon changes.